We Are Vineyard.
Somos Viña.
We Are Vineyard.
What I've noticed traveling around the place now and seeing, for some churches, Alpha is an app. It's like we do jam making. Somebody told me last weekend that half the church income came from jam making. So some people they do jam making.
Wow.
But they do other, connect groups, youth, children, all
so
the good,
Alpha's
all
one
things.
of the things.
That's one of the things.
Right.
But for us, Alpha is the operating system.
Yeah.
It's like everything revolved because we're focused on evangelization.
Yeah.
So Alpha is front and center. So it's like every Sunday we're thinking, it's either we've got 2 Sundays where you've got the Alpha testimonies, people coming on it, and that's why we get hundreds of people coming, and then those hundreds of people bring hundreds of people on the next course. So the more you get the momentum, the more you get the people coming.
Welcome to the We Are Vineyard podcast, conversations to help us grow with Jesus and each other. In today's episode, Jay talks with the Reverend Nicky Gumbel, pioneer of Alpha and a speaker by video at our 2023 National Conference, Making All Things New, which is happening this summer. Let's listen in.
Well, Nicky, thanks for joining us.
No, thank you. It's an honor to be with you.
Well, we're here making you do all kinds of things. We came to London, trapped you in your own place, and are putting you to work for a whole day. So.
Well, it's always good when you come here. I will never forget the day you preached at 7 of our services. Set the place alight.
It was really, really fun. And it changed my life because I went back and started thinking differently about how we do church, and I'm really, really grateful for you. And so you've not heard this podcast, so basically it's just story. So we start where you should start, which is where were you born and grew up?
I was born very close to here. I've had a very boring life. 67 years.
This is a pretty exciting place.
67 years.
Right.
And I'm still, where we are right now is within half a mile of where I was born.
Really?
And lived, where my parents lived. And I was born on Hyde Park Corner.
Really?
Which now is the Lanesborough Hotel, was St. George's Hospital. And my parents lived 250 yards from HTB.
Really?
But never went there because they weren't churchgoers, and nor was I.
So you were born that close your whole life here.
Yeah.
And what did your folks do? What was his profession?
Both my parents were barristers.
Oh.
They were both lawyers. They met on opposite sides of a case. My father had been a lawyer in Germany and had been disbarred because he was Jewish. And so he had left Germany and come over here and qualified as a barrister over here. And he was interned in the first week of the war because he was German. He joined the British Army as a private in 1942.
Wow.
And he was a full colonel by 1945.
Wow.
My mother was not a churchgoer. She was mayor of Kensington, Chelsea. She was vice chair of the Greater London Council. She was chair of the magistrates, chair of St. George's Hospital.
Wow.
She did lots and lots of things in public life. She was a law lecturer, and so that they were very much involved in law.
But no faith stuff, no church?
No church, no. They were not churchgoers at all.
Wow.
My father, when I was 14, my mother took me for a walk, and she said, "Your father is German and Jewish, and you're never to speak to him about it."
Wow.
And I never did. And I never talked to my mother again. That was the last conversation I had with my mother about it.
Wow.
One conversation. My sister and I can remember it.
I bet.
So clearly.
I bet you can. And was she preempting something? Could she tell, like, something's going on with you? Or it was like,
I think she felt she ought to tell us.
Yeah.
But my father would not talk about anything that came close. We basically discussed the weather. That was everything else. School, where did you go to school? So everything I've discovered about my father, I've discovered in the last few years.
Really?
So a few years ago, I was contacted by a museum that was doing some research about my family. And they asked me, what do I know about my family? And I said, I know nothing. What do you know?
Right, yeah. Let's compare notes.
They said, well, we'll send you what we've got. And they sent me a file, which included my family tree. And then I understood why he wouldn't talk about it.
Really?
Because then I saw the concentration camps in which they had died. So Dachau and others, and it was just too traumatic. But it was amazing. It was amazing to get my family tree to see.
I bet.
My grandfather was called Sigmund. My great-grandfather was called Moses. And my great-great-grandfather was Abraham. Not the Abraham.
Yeah, I would assume.
It was, yeah. And then I discovered, another Gumbel had started the Gumbel Bank, which was confiscated in 1935 by the Nazis.
Oh, my goodness.
And in 2009, they put up a statue to Abraham Gumbel in the front of the bank to recognize that they had confiscated his bank. One of them was being the mayor of the town, and he'd stayed to look after the people, and he'd got his family out. But he was arrested in 1942. He was tortured. He was released, and 6 weeks later, he was murdered in a concentration camp. And you just think the trauma of that. And I've experienced a little bit of trauma in my life, and I found it hard to talk about. But imagine the trauma of all your family. One of my father's first cousin, he was a professor at the university, and he was thrown out because he was Jewish. And Einstein made a speech. So a book came out by Emil Gumbel about 2 years ago. So I discovered, and the first introduction is Einstein's speech saying why Professor Gumbel should not be thrown out of the university just because he was Jewish. And Einstein helped get him out. He got him a job in Paris, in France. And then when Hitler invaded France, Einstein got him a job in the US. And if you study maths at university, you will study the Gumbel distribution, which is still a thing. Wow! So I've discovered all this in the last few years because their books have been written about Bonhoeffer and all the rest of it. The non-Jews, the Christians who fought against Nazism. Yeah. But recently, I think there's more interest in the Jews who also were fighting against Hitler. And so that's the book about Emil Gumbel has just come out.
What a family story.
I'm now fascinated by it and able to discover it because of the books and because of and Wikipedia, actually. Wikipedia. I've discovered more about my family on Wikipedia than, I just Google the Gumbel family. And every time I Google it, there's more information.
Something new, right.
Yeah, there's lots more.
Well, and the ancestry DNA stuff now that you can, all the genealogies that you can trace.
I should do that. But
and I have, here's a fun fact for you. When my daughter did her family tree, we did ancestry DNA.
Okay.
I have in my family line an Archbishop of Canterbury.
No. Who's that?
John Potter.
Wow. What?
That's my relative.
What year was that?
Oh, goodness. I don't know. Well, he's the one who ordained John and Charles Wesley.
Wow.
It's my family.
Wow.
Yeah.
How amazing. Isn't that amazing? That's not that long ago.
No, not that long ago. Yeah, not that long ago. And so both of my mom's parents were from London.
Okay.
So I'm half Brit, so that's why it's always
wow,
the affinity.
How amazing! Yes. Well, I must do the ancestry thing. I've thought about doing it, but
it's fascinating. You discover all kinds of new things that you didn't know. Yeah, but you're already doing it with Wikipedia, I suppose.
Yeah, Wikipedia. And I can my mother's side as well. I can discover on Wikipedia.
You can.
So
that's and that's prolific. All those different people. That's pretty amazing heritage.
It is. I mean, I would give anything for 1 hour with my dad, where he was free to talk.
Right. Right. Truth serum or something.
I'd be so fascinated.
Yeah.
I mean, he had such an interesting life.
Yeah.
He knew such interesting people. I mean, he knew Einstein for sure. It'd be so interesting to find out.
And it describes the impact of trauma right there.
Yeah. I think a lot of people who, because I'm reading a lot of books now about people with similar family backgrounds, and it's all the same. They never spoke until the 2000s. Like 2005, people would say, so 60 years on, people would say, I'm ready to talk.
I can tell you. Well,
I'll start talking. So, I mean, obviously some people talk straight away, but vast majority couldn't and wouldn't. But 60 years on, some of them were beginning to just, obviously they'd processed it in some way. But how do you process trauma as just horrific?
Well, and your entire family. So it makes sense. So 14, your mom's like, we're not doing this.
Yeah.
So then how do you crash into life with Jesus? Because you're in a home that's like, we're not doing any of those things.
No.
So how do you crash into Jesus?
I became an atheist as a teenager. I was quite a vociferous atheist. And my first year at university, through my friends Nicky and Silla Lee, who wrote the marriage course and all that, they were less hostile than I had been. And Nicky had been exploring for about 9 months without telling me. He knew how hostile I was. He didn't dare tell me. And then he and Silla came back one night and they confessed that they had become Christians.
And you're like, come on.
I was horrified. I was seriously, because they were really lovely friends and wonderful people.
Right.
I thought, oh my goodness, you've got into some cult or something.
Yeah, you've ruined our friendship.
Yeah. So I decided that night I'd explore. And the only thing I had was an old Bible that I had for RE at school. And I started reading it. Matthew, Mark, Luke. Halfway through John's Gospel, I fell asleep 3 o'clock in the morning, and then I kept reading the next day and all the next day, and it had the ring of truth. And very reluctantly, because I thought life would be miserable from this moment onwards, I kind of said, okay, initially I thought I'll put it off to my deathbed, so I have a fun life, and then and then
last minute
that does not have much integrity about it.
Right.
So, and I thought life would be miserable. What the last thing in the world I expected was to find life in all its fullness.
Yeah. And so then what was the sort of turning point? You're reading the Bible, and then you're just like, I think I'll do this? Or was there
a struggle? There was, it's sort of almost like a dream when probably the dream actually happened. So much happened in the dream, but it probably happened in about 30 seconds. Right. So the same sort of struggle was going on in me of all my intellectual objections. Was I going to allow my intellectual objections to stop me? Because this had the ring of truth. But how could it fit with my philosophy, my atheist philosophy, which I thought was watertight? And Anselm of Canterbury said, credo ut intelligam, I believe in order that I might understand. And for me, understanding didn't come before belief. It came when I believed, I understood.
Wow.
But I didn't get all the answers before I took a step of faith.
Like, I'm going to trust this and see what it is.
Yeah.
Wow.
Credo ut intelligam, I believe in order that I might understand.
Wow.
And understanding came once I believed, but it didn't come beforehand.
Wow, that's cool. So then you go back to your friends and go, I think I believe this.
Yeah. I think the second bit follows. There's a papal encyclical which has two halves. One is credo ut intelligam. The second is intelligo ut credo. So I understand in order to believe. And I think the second half, since then, I've been on that journey, trying to understand in order to believe.
Yeah.
But I instantly I wanted everyone to know the story because I wanted to know the truth. This is like, why wouldn't you? It's like water in the desert. Why wouldn't you tell everyone it's here?
So you had an immediate experience of freedom. Wow.
Yeah, immediate experience of life in all its fullness, and wanting to communicate that to everybody. That's
so beautiful. And then how did that go? Then were you immediately like, well, I'm going to be a pastor, I guess? Or
no, it was more, I didn't know whether I thought, probably soon afterwards, I thought that's what I would most like to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the reasons I did law, because I wanted to get it out the way. I thought, my poor father, he had no... That to him, there's nothing else you could be in life but a barrister.
Right.
He could. The idea that I mean, we have a two-tier profession: barrister, solicitor.
Mm-hmm.
Idea of me being a solicitor, even, he couldn't contemplate.
Right.
If I wanted to be a doctor or that would have been.
Yeah.
The thought of me getting ordained. I mean, that would have sent him to an early grave. So
you're like, okay, I'll be a barrister.
I'll do it. He put me down at birth.
Yes.
So I did it, and I did it. I did nearly 10 years law altogether.
Oh, interesting.
And I loved it, and I came very close to staying, being a lawyer, because I loved it so much, and it was only sort of thinking through what did I want to do long term, and looking at if all my dreams came true as a lawyer, where would I end up? And it probably wouldn't have happened. But if I had fulfilled, I would have been like a high court judge, Court of Appeal, House of Lords. I don't want to do that.
Right.
And if your ladder's leaning against the wrong wall, don't stop climbing it. It's like, there's no point in climbing a ladder you don't want to get to the top of. So I realized, and when I looked at the others, the alternative, which is, I never dreamt I would be doing what I'm doing now, but I thought if I'm running a church, if I'm the pastor of a church, I could be all the time ministering in the name of Jesus, helping people, hopefully, and find a relationship with Jesus. And I thought I'd love to do that.
And your discipleship, though, so do you immediately find your way into a church? Like, as you start to follow Jesus, you're like, I guess I'll just go to this church.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, I started going to church.
Wow.
I loved, I've always loved it since then. I've loved the church, and I love the community. I love the people, and you
just found your way in right away, because that doesn't always happen, right? Sometimes people have encounters with Jesus and they just sort of do their own thing for a while, but church made sense to you. That's great. And then you're a barrister doing all your things.
Yeah.
How did the transition towards Alpha work? When as you're in church did you decide, okay, I think I'm going to be in ministry? And then
Alpha started, so I started coming to HCB in 1976.
Wow.
It was then a very small, no one under 50, robe choir, pews.
And how old were you?
I was 21.
21.
I was 21, and I started coming, and Sandy Miller had just become the young curate there.
Interesting.
So it was through friendship with, I would never have thought of going to that church if it hadn't been for Sandy. But Sandy being a barrister, and I wanted to, and then I went to a service there, because I was looking at other churches. I wasn't looking at HTB, because that was not known as a lively church. But I went, and I saw Sandy there. And Sandy preached an amazing talk on Ephesians 2, which I've never forgotten. So I went to him at the end of the service and said, could I meet with you? And he opened his diary. It was completely empty and nothing on at all. So he said, can you come?
How about now?
How about, come to tea, come back the next day for lunch. I'm starting a small group. Do you want to come to that?
Yeah, totally.
And then, so that was how I started coming to in 1976, and then I was a lay member there for 10 years, and then Sandy said, ask that question, take a long-term view, where do you want to be? And as soon as I started to look at that, I knew where I wanted to be. So Alpha had started in 1977, so it was a 6-week course. It was started by Charles Marnham, and his wife Tricia came up with the name Alpha. And it was running with about 6 people on the course in a home. And I went to speak at it, actually, in 1977. Probably, I would go in and gave one of the talks. But then I went off to theological college in 1983 in Oxford, did a degree in theology, and then came back in 86, and during which time there'd been John Wimber's visit in 1982, which had a big impact on all of us. And then and had a big impact on Alpha. The Alpha weekend, the healing evening, the course had changed during that period. Then Nicky and Syl had run it for 5 years, and they'd done a brilliant job with it. And I took it on in October 1990.
90, huh? And then how did, and many of the folks here might not know, how did Wimber end up showing up? I mean, do you know all of that?
Yeah, John Collins was the vicar here. And he asked David Watson, who'd been one of his curates and who'd traveled the world a lot, when you've been around the world traveling, who is the person who's most impressed you? And he said, John Wimber. And so John invited John Wimber to come here in 1982. And he preached on Sunday. And then there was an after meeting, which was led by Lonnie Frisbee.
Oh, my goodness.
And after that...
You've never seen someone like that, I imagine, at the church, yeah.
After that, Lonnie Frisbee was confined to his hotel room, I think.
I was going to say, was he not?
I think we weren't quite ready for Lonnie Frisbee. Or at least John Wimber didn't think we were quite ready for Lonnie Frisbee.
Totally.
So, and then he came back on Monday night and spoke to the leaders in the church, which was about 70 people then. It was, the church had grown a lot, but nothing like the scale that was going to happen post his visit. And that was when he had lots of words of knowledge, or the team had lots of words of knowledge, to which people responded. That was, it was a meeting we all still talk about, because the last word of knowledge he had was for someone who couldn't conceive. And we knew everyone in the room. We looked around and thought, well, that doesn't apply to anyone.
Right.
And then a very good friend of ours, whose name was Sarah, got up and went forward. And he said, what's your name? She said, Sarah. And of course, there is biblical precedent for that. He prayed for her. And 9 months later,
wow.
Or we say conception didn't take place in the spring, but it was 9 months later.
Right. Wow.
And they had 5 children. He was ordained. He is ordained in the Church of England. And the following night was in Church House, and that was the whole church, 250 people. And I had a very profound experience of the Holy Spirit there.
And had you had anything like that prior to that?
I had never had anything quite as powerful as that. No. He had. I was wearing my sort of 3-piece barrister's suit, but by the time I arrived, there was only seats at the front, and he had words of knowledge. People stood all over the place, and then he had this word of knowledge that there were 10 people with athlete's foot, and 9 people stood. And I was not going to stand, but Phipps was prodding me in the ribs, and eventually I did stand. And someone came, a team came over and prayed, and they said, "Do you want me to pray for your athlete's foot?" So I said, "No, thank you. I'm perfectly happy having athlete's foot. Doesn't bother me." So they said, "What would you?"
Well,
like?
then what do you want?
Yeah. And then I just prayed for that. I said, I would like to experience the power of the Spirit, and they prayed for me, and I made a lot of noise. And he said, John Wimber said, "Take that one out." So they carried me out through the French windows. And as I was being carried out, he said, "God is giving to that man the gift of evangelism." And so that was a big moment,
I'd say,
in my life. Although nothing happened, it wasn't like the next day I walked down the street and preached the gospel. It was a long time before anything really.
So a deposit of some kind, right? Yeah.
And it was only as I look back at it now that I think that was interesting that he gave that. He had that word of knowledge for me.
Well, and it's, when I've heard people describe these meetings at HTB or different Anglican churches, David Watson or Chorley Wood.
Yeah, David Pitches,
David Pitches. It's difficult to describe that these churches weren't ready for this. It wasn't like they were doing things like this all the time, and John's just another kind of traveling ministry person. They're just like good, faithful Anglican churches preaching the gospel, doing what they know how to do. And then this wave, it's like a wind.
Yeah, I've said, it was, for a long time, people had been praying. Sandy had been praying. And there was a guy before that. They used to have a little prayer meeting praying for the Holy Spirit, and healing was definitely something that we believed in,
right?
But we didn't have a model really for it. What John Wimber brought was a model. He always used to say that you need a theology, a model, and a practice. And he brought the theology and the model, and then I guess we've rolled out the practice for the last 40 years.
Yeah,
still are trying to.
Certainly.
So, just this whole style was so refreshing, really. That he was chewing gum, and they were all chewing gum, and I just love John Wimber. I love John Wimber. I love the way he. I love the fact that he was. I remember him being asked at one of these conferences, one of the Brighton conferences. There'd been an amazing time of ministry, like things we'd never seen before, and he was. And someone said to him, how do you prepare for a session like that? And he said, well, I have a Diet Coke and some crisps.
Yeah, he just takes all the heat out of it, right?
Take all the intensity out of it. And it was just human. And none of this like, it was just
I fasted. I laid on my face for 2 hours or something.
Yeah. Wow. Because it was like, you can all do this. We can all have a Coke and some crisps. Yeah. Everyone gets to play. That was the thing. Everybody gets to play. Yes. And that's what we've tried to do ever since. Get everyone involved in ministry. And the impact on the church in this country is phenomenal still. All the New Wine, Soul Survivor, the HTB Network, Alpha.
It's incredible.
There's no way Alpha would be what it is without John Wimber's visit here in 1982. We owe a huge, huge debt.
Well, and it's been my experience, and I've talked to you about this before, but I mean, being at New Wine, being in Soul Survivor, being at HTB and any number of other churches, the sense of connectedness to what I know the Vineyard to be, the vineyards I've been in the U.S. And of course, there's a diversity of Vineyard churches, just like there's a diversity of Anglican churches. But it's seamless. It feels like we're the same kind of thing. I mean, when I come and listen to preaching or get involved in ministry. And so to see the way that God has brought us together. I mean, even John and Eleanor Mumford, their connection to the Anglican Church here, New Wine, David Pitchess, and of course John and Debbie Wright, being David's daughter. The kind of unity that you guys move in here is, and of course I'm sure there's any number of messes. That's just what it is to be human.
There's a lot of unity in the church in the UK. Between Jesus House, which is mainly Nigerian, Hillsong, Baptist Church, Methodists, Catholics. We meet together once a year, the sort of leaders of all the different movements, and we're all really good friends. I mean, the great advantage of what's happened in the church, there are many disadvantages to a declining church. But one of the great advantages, when there are only 6 of you left, you're
like, we should be friends.
We should be friends. Even if we come, since there are only 6 of us, why don't we work together?
Well, so the disagreements seem less because there's been a shift, obviously, post-Christendom. But it's also, it seems as though, this is my experience just showing up, these kind of moves of the Spirit went across all of the different groups.
Catholic Church as well.
Exactly. So they all kind of have a familiarity in listening to the Holy Spirit, ministering in a certain way, to where they're like, well, this is just kind of what we do. Now, we might have our own theological thinking about that, but we're all kind of doing that.
Well, again, that was John Wimber, wasn't it? I love that story. I mean, you'll have a better version of it than mine, but my memory of it was him saying to the Lord, Lord, do you like the Southern Baptists? And the Lord said to him, I love the Southern Baptists. Do you love the Catholic Church? Yeah, I love what about the snake handlers? I love the snake handlers. And he went through this list on and on and on.
It's incredible.
Eventually, he said to the Lord, is there any bit of the church you don't like? And the Lord said, yes, your bit.
I have heard that.
I just love it. I just think, the humility of the guy and to tell that story is. And it was so okay, we love everybody.
Yeah.
We love everybody.
Yes.
We love all the church.
Well, your brother is never your enemy.
No,
this thing I heard him say over and over.
Yeah.
They're always your brother. Right?
Yeah.
And brothers fight from time to time.
Yeah.
But they're never your enemy.
But that was, it's based on relationship. That whatever part of the church you come from, you are a son or daughter of God the Father. So we are brothers and sisters. We are followers of Jesus. We all love Jesus.
Yeah.
We all have the Holy Spirit living within us.
Yes.
It's the relationships that unite us, not our doctrines, which we're always going to, could argue about.
Totally.
That's a waste of time. Let's get on with preaching the gospel and loving one another.
For the 6 weeks leading up to Pentecost Sunday with a break for Mother's Day, we're sharing stories that highlight the movement of the Holy Spirit among us. This is part of the Empowered series that vineyards all over the U.S. are participating in. For more information, check out vineyardusa.org/Pentecost 2023 and share your stories on social media using the hashtag VUSAEmpowered.
Tell me a little of how you've seen Alpha grow, what Alpha is now, because in the Vineyard, we've been building more and more partnerships with Alpha because Alpha feels like the Vineyard and the Vineyard feels like
totally,
Alpha. So it's seamless for me personally, but I think, some of our Vineyard pastors are slowly getting introduced. So give sort of a 10,000 foot view, because again, you take over, it shifts a bit, becomes more evangelistic, not just sort of a discipleship class or training experience. So talk a little bit about what Alpha has become and what it's sort of is now across the
thanks
country.
to John Wimber's visit, the weekend on the Holy Spirit came in and the healing evening, and then we found there were people coming from outside of the church, and this course which we would never have invented as an evangelistic course. We had an evangelistic course. We had Agnostics Anonymous or something, and there was no one came, not surprisingly. And if they did come, very occasionally, one person every 10 years. And then we had an Alpha where we're getting loads of people from outside of the church coming. And so we decided eventually to drop Agnostics Anonymous and say, if you want to explore faith, come on Alpha.
Right.
And then we saw this. So I took it on in October 1990. It was already a thriving course when I took it on, but it grew, and it was because there's so many more people outside the church than inside the church.
Right.
Eventually, we had about 350 people coming in 1993, and that's when churches were ringing me up and they were saying, how do you do this Alpha thing?
Right.
And I was spending all my time on the phone explaining to Baptist pastors and Catholic priests and Salvation Army how to run an Alpha course. Yeah. And I thought, why don't I just get them all together in one place?
Yeah.
And then I can tell them and that'll be it.
Yeah.
So we put on a conference. 1,000 people turned up.
Wow.
I mean, we've been used to putting on the conferences for John Wimber. So we knew how to organize a conference. But this time we thought, well, why don't you just tell them about our little thing, Alpha? No one's going to turn up for that.
Right.
And 1,000 people turned up. And I thought that would be it. But then they said, well, could you come and do it in the north of England? And can you come to Hong Kong? And so we started doing conferences all over the world.
Wow.
And then it spread to every country, basically.
And then you film all the talks and you start reproducing the material. Right.
Yeah. So after that, so the first conference was May the 22nd, 23rd, 1993.
Okay.
And then somebody said, a South African pastor said, I'm going to film it. So I said to Sandy, it's going to be filmed anyway.
Right.
Don't you think we ought to do the filming?
Right. Right.
And so very reluctantly, because we had experience of filming things and they were all sitting around in the bookshop, nobody wanted it. Well, okay, let's film it. and we agreed to film it providing no one would notice that it was being filmed. So there was cameras were on the side, and it was a very low budget, and the DVDs just flew. I mean, it wasn't video; it was videos in those days.
Yes,
they just flew.
Yes,
and suddenly very quickly we were hearing stories of people coming to faith on Alpha courses all over the place using the videos. Yeah. So then we re-videoed and we're still doing the same thing, you know, endlessly. We've filmed
you never end when you start, right?
No, and it's so 30 years on, we're still, you know, trying to improve it and working on it, and all the time we're just about to do a new lot of Alpha film series, and we're trying to improve what we did last time.
Well, I have the old videos. I have
the 1994 ones.
Yeah, but there's a flower bouquet. That's
a bit later, I think.
Is it? Okay,
yeah,
maybe
the original ones didn't have anything in them.
No, okay.
They just said, because we didn't want anyone to know that we were filming.
Right.
So they were literally just bare stage.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So the one I possess has the bouquet, and they are incredible. I still really like them, honestly. I really do. I mean, they have a bit more, you know, now with the way film equipment works, has a bit more of a vintage look to it, but man, I would just play them. We would play them. Yeah, this was when I was in Columbus, Ohio, before we planted. Just play them, and you know, people would discuss. You just kind of facilitate the space, and people would discuss, and then we did the weekend away, and people would encounter the Holy Spirit. I mean, it was just straightforward. Boom, 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 boom. I mean,
amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing to think about. But here's what's interesting: we moved to Denver to plant. And I went to just run the play because I'd never, you know, I just thought, how am I do? And it didn't go great.
Oh,
it was totally different, just the experience. So then I was like, well, we'll just do something that's similar to that. I'll do kind of live talks, do some different things. So we would do different kinds of things. And then all of a sudden, it would have been in 2008 or 9, maybe 2010. Todd Proctor had been doing some different things around Alpha. And I'd known him from some other things, and we meet together, and he says, you know, man, this Alpha, there's something God's doing on Alpha in the U.S. And I was like, oh, Todd, I did that a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I went and watched the film, some of the new film series stuff that was coming out, and I was like, this is really good. And so because I was afraid to do it, like with our church, me and a friend of mine just put our friends that we knew that didn't know Jesus in a restaurant, of all things. It was a restaurant owner who wasn't sure how to share their faith. And every single person, they all came to faith.
Oh, amazing.
Had encounters with Jesus, the whole thing. And then I was like, all right, I'm back in. So we've been running Alpha consistently. And I always did like versions of Alpha, but I do the talks live, and but I mean, now running it again, I'm like, this stuff there's just a favor that if you just run the plays, you do the training, show people how they host, the emphasis on hospitality, the emphasis on not giving answers, just asking good questions and listening. It creates such a warm environment that also enables your church to participate. So, you know, our poor Vineyard people, they just hear me talk about Alpha all the time. They're
I think, you know, that there's, what I've noticed traveling around the place now and seeing, for some churches, Alpha is an app. It's like we do jam making. Somebody told me last weekend that half the church income came from jam making. So some people they do jam making.
Wow.
But they do other, you know, connect groups, youth, children, all the good,
Alpha's
all
one
things.
of the things.
It's one of the things.
Right.
But for us, Alpha is the operating system.
Yeah.
It's like everything revolves because we're focused on evangelization.
Yeah.
So Alpha is front and center. So it's like every Sunday we're thinking, you know, it's either you've got 2 Sundays where you've got the Alpha testimonies, people coming on it, and that's why we get hundreds of people coming, and then those hundreds of people bring hundreds of people on the next course. So the more you get the momentum, the more you get the people coming.
Well, and it takes time.
It does take a long time.
It's not the kind of thing you do once and go, did this work or not work?
Yeah.
Because, you know, often the first times it's just Christians checking things out. Takes them a minute to trust it. Then if even one person meets Jesus, then they bring everyone.
Yeah.
Like the Alpha.
Because all their
did.
friends are
Of
outside
course.
the church.
Well, and they want them to come.
Yeah.
They're like, I just had this experience.
Yeah.
I think our second one after the restaurant, the second one as we were restarting it, it was 2 people brought everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was 60 some folks.
Wow.
And they were all friends of like these 2 folks, family members, different people, because they were like, well, first of all, their family saw the transformation in their life. And they went, what is going on here? And they said, what's this thing? And well, you're probably in some kind of cult. It's not a cult. It's a dinner. We have dinner and we talk and
come and see.
That's right. And then they all come. So the whole thing turns over. So one last thing, and then I'll let you go. There's been a huge connection to the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
How did that form? How did the Catholic thing form? And tell me about how that's been working.
So a Catholic bishop called Bishop Ambrose, Newcastle and Hexford, heard about Alpha, and he sent a couple of Catholic priests along in disguise
to the class. Like, hey, you're just
actually, he sent to a conference, but I think before that we'd had a Catholic priest on the course who said at the end of it, he said to me, there's nothing on this course that we as Catholics disagree with. He said there are things we'd want to add, but that's true of everyone.
Sure.
You know, this is Alpha, not Alpha to Omega. It's the first, it's the beginning, it's the kerygma, as they call it in the Catholic Church. And then in 1996, the Cardinal ran a conference in the Catholic Cathedral for priests and lay people. It was so oversubscribed that they had to run it 3 times.
Wow.
And the first one they ran, I remember the first night, we did a model Alpha evening, how can I be filled with the Spirit? And the singing in tongues, we had never heard anything like it.
Wow.
I mean, we just never heard such beautiful singing in tongues. And I went back that night, and this was just Catholic priests, it was all Catholic. I read again Acts 10, where Peter says, if God has given the same Spirit to them, who are we to oppose God?
Yes.
And I thought, you know, if we don't do this, we're going to be opposing God, because God's given the same Spirit to them.
Yeah.
And then the Catholics, when it went into France, the French Catholic bishops set up a theological commission to look at Alpha. And they reported back to the bishops, who said they wanted 15 changes. So 7 of them were to do with the translation. And we solved those. 6 of them were improvements. So they were things like, you know, when I said the universal church, I talked about the universal church around the world, being the church all around the world. And they said, no, it's the church back in time as well as around the world.
That's right.
So I improved.
Cross space and time.
Yeah.
Right.
So I corrected that. And there were others I things I just corrected.
That were helpful. Like,
they were really helpful.
Yeah.
We were left with 2 things. One of them was a quote from an Anglican bishop called Bishop J.C. Ryle that they thought was too strong. So I found a quote from Father Raniero Cantalamessa, the preacher to the Pope.
Cantalamessa.
Who's wonderful, loves the vineyard.
He is amazing.
So I found a quote from him that was even stronger and substituted that, and they were totally happy with that. And there was one thing left that they objected to. But I had the Catholic Catechism with me, and I had looked it up, and I'd found the place in the Catholic Catechism where they taught exactly the same thing. So I showed.
You responded. What do you think?
I showed them the Catholic Catechism, and they said, "Yes, we know it's Catholic, but we don't like it." So
that's perfect.
So we
like, well, I don't know what to do. Yeah.
So we agreed to footnote. So if you look at questions of life, you'll find a footnote to the Catholic Catechism. So we just footnoted that bit to the Catholic Catechism, and they were happy with that because I mean they couldn't really object to something that was in the Catholic Catechism. So since then, I mean that was 25 years ago.
Wow.
Nobody's raised an objection. We haven't had a single objection from the Catholic Church, or anybody else actually, because we always say, you know, if you've got a theological objection, let us know, and we'll do the same thing.
Totally.
But there's nothing in it that isn't consistent with the Salvation Army.
Right.
It was hard on communion because to find something acceptable to the Salvation Army who don't have the sacraments and the Catholics was really hard. So I asked the help of Archbishop Rowan Williams. Do you know Rowan Williams? Brilliant theologian. I showed him the section. I said, you know, can you help me? This is what I've written about communion. Is there a way that I could improve it to make it more acceptable to the Catholics without losing the Protestants.
Right.
And he said, if you can find the way, you will get the Nobel Peace Prize.
Exactly. People have been trying that for a while. Yeah, totally. You're not the first.
So he said, I suggest you leave it exactly as it is, and people will be able to work
And they
with
can
it.
amend it. Right, right. They can add or subtract.
So that's basically what we've done. So it's
Wow.
and now it's like I think it's 30%, maybe 25-30% of the church is running Alpha are Catholic. And we have a very close... I've just come back from a gathering in Rome with 70 Catholic organizations, because we're working on this 2033, the 10 years to go for the 2000th anniversary of the resurrection. And we're working together with lots of people, including 70 Catholic organizations that are focused on 2033. But Pippa said to me, my wife Pippa said to me, as we left, she said, what was lovely this time, because we've been working with them for 27 years now.
Wow.
For the first time, she said, this time we felt like family.
Yeah.
And they've always treated us in a very honouring way, respectful, but as guests.
Yeah.
And this time they treated us like we didn't feel any difference.
That's
we were really just part of it. They were all running Alpha. They all knew Alpha. They were all running Alpha. They didn't. It didn't feel like there was any. We were just family.
What a gift! I mean, and it is a miracle in that sense.
It is amazing. None of this was planned. None of this was, there was never a grand strategy. We've just been trying to follow the Holy Spirit, and whatever. We never try and encourage anybody to run Alpha we encourage it, but we never try, we don't, all we do is deal with interest.
Yeah.
The fact is, on our Alpha small group this time, because of their experience, the husbands are interested, the partners are interested, the friends are interested, and so they'll come. And then their friends will get interested, and they come. And the same with Alpha. Church runs Alpha and says, look, this is what's happened to our church.
Yep.
And other people go, oh, so how do you do that?
Yes.
And then it spreads like that. And then a country hears, I hear they're running it in the Netherlands. Okay.
Yeah.
What's your experience in the Netherlands?
Totally.
Oh, well, maybe we should try it in I don't know,
Denmark. Right.
Denmark.
Right. Yeah. And I know
Estonia or Lithuania.
Totally.
And it spreads.
Well, it's because it's right down the middle, and the emphasis on hospitality, and then an encounter with the Holy Spirit. All those little things connect so many dots. I am so grateful, and I'm hoping and praying that every Vineyard Church tries Alpha.
Oh.
I mean, because the world has changed so much in the time that most people pastor. So they're still preaching, they're leading worship, they're doing the things they know how to do. But Alpha creates an easy way for people to invite. Frankly, it offers some discipleship to many of the folks in your church. Like they learn many of the basic things, but in a compelling way that is fresh. And then they have ways to share their faith more easily and listen and learn skills of listening and hospitality. So,
well, I think it's the best leadership training that you can get, because if you can host an Alpha small group well, you can do anything. I interviewed Tony Blair, who was Prime Minister, just after he ceased being Prime Minister, and he said every small group is the same, whether it's the Working Men's Club or the board of a public company or the cabinet or the G12. You have people who talk too much, you have people who have to be drawn out, and every small group is the same.
Yeah.
And if you can host a small group, well, small group's based on this verse. I think it's in Proverbs 20 verse 5, something like that. In the heart of every individual is a deep well, and the wise person draws it out. So if you think of all the guests in your group, inside of them is a deep well. There's gold, to mix the metaphors. There's gold that can be drawn out of every person. And the task of the host is not to preach at them, but to draw out the gold. And draw out often the vulnerabilities, because we think, well, impress people with our strengths, but actually we connect through our vulnerabilities. And so as people start to be vulnerable, to say, like when after the talk on why did Jesus die, has anybody here needed to forgive anyone? Yeah, I need to forgive forgive my ex-husband. It's a daily battle to forgive my ex-husband. Okay, now you've made yourself vulnerable. Someone else say, well, I need to ask forgiveness because I was an alcoholic and I feel a lot of guilt about what I did. And then immediately You connect through your vulnerabilities.
Yes.
Everybody loves the person who's just said they've got to forgive their.
Yes.
Everybody loves the person who's, wasn't an alcoholic. Everybody loves the person who's just had a row with their mum.
Right.
They just love.
Which is everyone, by the way. Right.
So it's just it's the human aspect.
It is.
Of it, that the connection that is just so amazing. But that skill to draw out from the people in the group, make sure everyone in the group has spoken if they want to, and the connection between the people so that you're not, that it doesn't revolve around you. If you can do that in a boardroom, if you can draw out the wisdom from everyone who is a board member in your company, in the heart of every individual is a deep well. There's a lot of wisdom around that table. Can you draw it out? And then take your lead from that.
Yes.
If you're on the cabinet, if you listen to the people rather than just coming with an idea and not hearing the objections and the nuances. G12, if you can find from every nation what can they contribute, what are the wisdom. So people who come and help on Alpha do it well, get promoted at work.
Right, that's right. They learn skills. Yeah.
They learn skills.
Totally.
And then they can run they can then host on the next course. They can run a connect group. They can do whatever.
Yeah.
They can run a church.
Yeah.
And a lot of them do go on to run churches.
Wow.
So there's a guy called Alex Wood. He was an atheist. His mum sat next to someone on a bus, and the person on the bus told them, because their son was struggling, he was just gone to university, and he was a bit just struggling, and this person on the bus said, why don't you send him along to Alpha? So Alex came along to Alpha, atheist, turned up, became a Christian, became and helped on the next course, led on the next course, did students, then he got ordained at this college here, St. Mellitus. Then he went to be a curate at our church plant in Brighton. Then he planted a church in Portsmouth, led 5 churches, and then Archie recruited him back to be the lead pastor at HTB. He's now the lead pastor at HTB. But he's planted all these churches in the meantime. And, through 12 years ago, he was an atheist.
Through a bus, an invitation on a bus.
Yeah, through two mothers talking on a bus.
Wow.
But that process of going from atheist, helper, host, connect group leader, church pastor, church planter, it's all the same skill that you're basically.
Yes.
That's why it's rather than an app, it's the operating system, and because you are. It's also training people.
Well, and the power of invitation too in that story.
Yeah.
Who could pick on a bus will lead to a planter.
Yeah.
But just one person inviting one person leads to all this change and training in their life, in a life with Jesus.
Yeah. And he heads up Alpha UK as well. So he's like, this guy's...
he's doing okay. Yeah.
And he's just a young guy. He's still a young guy. And he could say, look, 12 years ago I was an atheist, and now I'm heading Alpha UK.
Wow. Okay, so I have one last question, if you can manage it. You want one more?
Yeah,
Here's the question. So if you could, this Nicky Gumbel could talk to Nicky Gumbel as a new believer. You've just met Jesus. You're thinking maybe I could do ministry, whatever. What would you want to tell him? What would be the wisdom that you think you've learned that you think could maybe either give him a shortcut or help him prepare for what he was about to step into? What do you think that you would want to say to that young new believer leading, fumbling around trying to share his faith? Because there's a lot of people like that. There's people listening right now going, well, look at all this stuff you've gotten to do, and I don't even know what I'm doing. I don't know how to move through this life and ministry. I'd love to do ministry, but how would I ever even do that? So it's a similar person is my point.
I've made so many mistakes in my life. It would take another 47 podcasts to even begin to unwrap the mistakes I made. Right. But I think perhaps the biggest, if I was to choose one thing to pass on to someone else, I'd say don't worry. Just do it. Live my life. If I had to live my life again, I'd want to live it basically exactly the same, but without the worry.
You mean the worrying didn't help?
The worrying.
Jesus says
help.
something like that.
Yeah. I wish I'd listened to Jesus. But Churchill. I've had many worries in my life, most of which have not happened. It's basically all the things that so much of what we worry about never happens. And Jesus is so wise. That's what I try to do. Live in day-tight compartments. Just live today. Lean into whatever you're doing. Even if it's going to the dentist, lean into it. It's because this thing of once this is over, is such a danger that you sort of, and then you worry about that, and then the next thing's around the corner, and you're worried about that. If you can just lean into whatever you're doing, and live a day at a time, as Jesus says, then I think all the things. I've expended an awful lot of energy on worrying about things that I shouldn't have worried about, and just trusted that the Lord was in control, and that I could trust him. And I think that would be. It's one thing to say stop worrying. It's another thing to stop worrying.
Right.
So it's not very useful advice to give to anyone. But
or you can crowd it out by trusting. To your point, if you can trust God, you might not worry.
Yeah, and just having to follow Jesus, live one day at a time. Who of you can add anything to your life by worrying? Let tomorrow's worries worry for themselves. Just today's worries are enough. Just focus on what you're doing. Enjoy it, and live. Yeah, you've got to plan ahead. You've got to think ahead, but you don't need to worry ahead.
That's good. Well, I really appreciate you making more time to hang out with us today.
Oh, loved it. Absolutely loved it.
And I would love to bother you again someday. I'll just keep showing up.
Please keep. Yeah.
I'll just keep showing up.
Hugely value the friendship with you and with the Vineyard.
Yeah, well.
Love you guys. So grateful. I've never express sufficiently our gratitude to the Vineyard, to John Wimber and to the whole Vineyard movement, which we just love, and we've learnt so much and modelled the whole of the ministry and Alpha. So much of it is modelled on what we learnt from you guys.
Well, it's all mutual, so we just keep showing up at your events and running Alpha. We'll just we're the ones that mill around the edges of the room praying for people.
Yes.
So we'll just keep doing that. That's our best place. Yeah.
We love that. We absolutely love that.
Well, grateful.
So grateful to you.
Thank you, Nicky.
God bless.
The We Are Vineyard podcast is a production from the team at Vineyard USA. If you've been enjoying the podcast, here's a few ways you can help us. Leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Connect with us online for additional resources. Our website is vineyardusa.org, and we're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at @VineyardUSA. Thanks for listening. See you next week.